We make our choices, or they make us. At every moment, we are free to make them, or is our life based on the choices of others? Do you think the choices you make daily will make you happy in the long run? I know, these are pretty difficult questions to answer. I myself feel strange if I stop to think too much about it, but it's undeniable that everyone is always so much on autopilot that there isn't much time left to reflect. We're so busy trying to do this or that we don't have much time left to think about the choices we've made or the ones we'll make tomorrow. Before we realize it, years have gone by, and it's kind of hard to talk about choices without thinking about chaos theory and the sensitivity of initial conditions. Even if the difference is insignificant at first, over time, the changes accumulate, resulting in an event entirely different from the one initially expected. How many subtle things that you didn't even notice have happened in your life to bring you to this moment? Listening to me? How many have happened in mine to be recording this audio now? Well, since they have happened, come with me to analyze the episode. The choices from the amazing world of Gumball. The episode starts with Nicole complaining about her life and family, saying that every single day has been horrible and that all she wants is a more well-behaved family. Anyone watching can immediately sense some exaggeration. I mean, every day has been horrible, but then we discover the context she's in to say something like that so off the cuff. She was under tremendous stress and pressure, in the middle of a chaotic situation caused by her family, which led her to say these things without really thinking them through. The situation itself intensified her anger and surrounded her with negative points. The kids wouldn't stop screaming for food, and instead of calming things down, Richard egged them on to scream even louder, distracting her even more and almost starting a fire with the food. Nicole feels even more cornered because no one around her can handle the situation with even a minimum of competence. The last straw is when Darwin sprays her in the face with a can of spray paint. Just as it seems like she's about to explode with rage, the screen freezes, and she starts questioning how things had gotten to such a depressing point. Where had she gone wrong? She starts thinking about all the what-ifs, and she ends up concluding that Richard is the chaos in her life. Maybe if she hadn't met him, she wouldn't have experienced all the problems and sadness she's gone through. And indeed, she really wouldn't have gone through the same sorrows and problems. She would have experienced different ones based on the other choices she might have made. We have this false impression of looking only at the positive and advantageous side of the life we didn't live, and we think that if we had made different choices, we wouldn't have gone through so much pain. But in reality, we just wouldn't have gone through those specific pains. In the end, every path will have its highs and lows, and to be honest, it's usually more lows. This is what Nicole learns in this episode. Then, a flashback shows the moment when she met Richard and all the choices she could have made that would have affected the sensitivity of the initial conditions. The flashback begins with her parents taking her to a karate tournament, and right away, we can see how absurdly and even unrealistically demanding they are. Her mother shows narcissistic traits and is extremely controlling, wanting to plan out her daughter's life down to the smallest details. She's a perfectionist and thinks Nicole could always have done more, even if it was already perfect. For example, when Nicole shows her report card, her mother gets angry over a single F, which stood for female, because she only wants perfect results. Her father, on the other hand, is very apathetic, yet he has no problem expressing his anger issues in front of Nicole. If you stop to think about it, you can already see how these negative traits of her parents influenced some aspects of her personality as an adult. And to conclude, when her father breaks the car and she's about to run to the tournament to make it on time, her mother calls out to her. Nicole responds, "I know, I love you too," but in reality, her mother was just going to say something about winners and losers. This shows how her mother is so focused on creating expectations for her daughter that she forgets to love her. Nicole then goes through several scenarios that could have changed her life forever if she had made different choices. But since she didn't make those choices, she ends up meeting Richard. However, she then goes back to the beginning and questions how her life would have been in each of these situations. The first path would have made her arrive at the tournament on time and would have turned her into an extremely powerful and successful person. She would have made a lot of money, become president, and even a dictator in the future. In a way, this would have fulfilled all of her parents' expectations, except for the dictatorship part, I guess. But even though this might have seemed like the ideal path for her to be happy, was it really? Would that life have been hers or her parents'? So we see that while Richard did prevent her from achieving a lot, he also gave her other things, a family and a life that, although not as successful, was truly hers. The second path would have led her to marry Banana Joe, which would have driven her to the brink of insanity, showing that this would have resulted in a situation far worse than her current one. The third path would have led her into an abusive relationship relationship with a guy who was an absolute jerk, destroying her self-esteem and making her live a life based on seeking his approval. This would have led her to undergo numerous plastic surgeries and ultimately burn down the house. And if up until now, she could have ended up in a mental institution or prison, in this scenario, she goes straight to the cemetery by accepting Mr. Small's suggestion to use hugs as an alternative medicine to cure diseases. She also wonders what would have happened if she hadn't stepped on the butterfly, mentioning the butterfly effect itself, but in the process, she ends up swallowing it and dying again. But what if she had accepted a ride from those guys who thought they were cool for not wearing helmets? Well, guess what happens? And have you ever stopped to think about how many choices could have killed you up to this point? After reviewing the other paths she could have taken, she ends up meeting Richard again and says that she had no other choice. The truth is, she did have many other choices, but that statement represents, in a way, Nicole's acceptance of the decisions she made and the understanding that she can't change them. Richard then just keeps saying why repeatedly to everything she says in a somewhat irritating way, which simply makes her snap out of autopilot for a moment and ask herself why she's doing all of this. Nicole then says that she needed to be the best so that people would like her, and Richard responds that a lot of people already like her. This teaches Nicole that we don't need to be the best or necessarily come in first place to be loved. True love comes from those who like us before we become winners, and often, it's precisely because of these people that we become winners in the end. And I mean that in many different aspects, not just in terms of winning a competition, but in having someone like that by our side, for example. This in itself makes us feel like winners. The time to reach the competition runs out, and Nicole becomes very sad, saying that she would have to go home empty-handed without a trophy. Richard then hands her a walnut and says that her hands don't need to be so empty. This symbolizes that not everything considered absolute success will fill our void. Sometimes, we find what makes us winners in the simplest things and in the most amazing people we have by our side. And sometimes, these things can lose their importance or be hard to see amidst so much stress, anger, or sadness. But in the end, it's these things that keep us from feeling empty-handed, whether it's gratitude for having a very lively family or simply a walnut. Nicole then asks Richard what she should do with her life, and he replies that she could start living. This is a very beautiful response because, until that moment, Nicole had been living her parents' lives, strictly following the path they wanted her to take. And as we've seen, it would indeed have made her a winner, but in the end, she managed to be a winner in her own way, by living a different life, and best of all, living a life that was truly hers. She then recalls the entire journey they took together from that point onward, how her parents didn't approve of Richard, how the two of them had to make their way in the world and had each other for so long, and how their love endured despite all the difficulties, leading them to get married and build a beautiful family. Although far from being a perfect family, it was still something incredible. This realization made her understand that this wasn't the worst or the best situation she could be in, but it was the one she was in. And while there were many other choices she could have made, her family made the choices she actually made worth it. This acceptance prevented her from exploding in anger as everyone expected, and instead she laughed. As she says in the end, she wouldn't change a thing.